Dear friends, we are gathered here today in the memory of our dear Zarina, who passed away on 25th April, who I feel now has merged into the blinding light. Before we start, I would request all of you to observe a minute silence in her memory. Thank you. She was just not an artist my gallery represented, but to me, she was a very dear friend, a mentor, a confidant. When I look at very large historical exposition, which Kiran Nadar Museum has now hosted, I actually feel such a some emotional connect with her. I feel I've been a co-traveler with her last 2 decades. Today's conversation is not so much about Zarina as an artist. It is more about her as a person. But with her, it's a little hard because both have been very interwoven. Her work, her art. Most of our art we see actually is alive. So it is inevitable that while we speak of a work of her life, her art automatically comes in, and we have a little bit of a deeper understanding of it. We have here with us two speakers, Ram Rahman and Kalidas, who have known Zarina for the past, I think, since the 70s. This was, and we have Roobina Karode, the director and chief curator KNMA, who has followed Zarina's practice since 2000 when she assisted the artist during her very large exhibition at the Mills College, California. And she has curated the ongoing exhibition at the KNMA, Zarina, A Life in Nine Lines. It is so difficult for me sometimes to, when people say to speak about Zarina, my relationship with her, because the memories that have been flooding, when my interactions with her, I would like to share with you first that how I first came in touch with her work. In 1996, 97, we had a mini print show, but 1996, I chanced upon her work when Anupam Sood, who curated this large exhibition, had her work in the show. I really had no idea about Zarina or her books. The works come in, the crates were opened, and there I see this fabulous Zen-like packing and this Zen-like work. I just fell in love with her work. That work was Road Lines, which is still very sought after by a lot of collectors. That work, and I called her up. I said, I want to have your show because as a gallerist, I always responded to minimalism, abstraction, and she laughed. And we both didn't know each other. She spoke to Krishna Reddy, who I was already showing about me. And when she came to Delhi, I think it was the late 90s, and with her friend Joyce, and we met up in Delhi, and she decided to show with us. So the first show we had of Zarina in Espace was in 2000, and she showed that very, very famous work of hers, the most important work of hers, Home is a Foreign Place. She had just done it in 1999. She had broken it into 6 sets, and a few more works we showed with that series. I had that time I told her, I said, look, I do not know because India is not ready for this kind of a minimalism or the buyer, the market, but I will still show the work because I love it. And none of you will believe it that I sold the show 2 or 3 times. She also was very happy, and my journey with her started from 2000. There were There was no looking back to it. I'm so flooded with my memories of her, of my interactions with her over the past 20 years. I would annually visit her in her studio, and every time we would speak of so many subjects. We spoke of, she would speak to me so much about her memories, her growing up memories, her Aligarh day, a very special relationship with her father. And like also the difficulty she faced when she went to New York as a woman of the feminist movement she had joined. So many memories, and also about world politics, her concern about the refugees, which again used to be so interwoven in last few years, was more political, her work. Some of my most vivid memories are the hours that I spent with her in a studio. Every show of hers, I would go and visit her, and we would select works together. And for every work, we used to have such long conversations because she used to be so eloquent. I used to get absolutely kind of my knowledge, my whole thing was getting enriched. I remember when I had gone to select works for this exhibition, recent. It was the show was titled "Recent Works." Every show she used to title, and it was in 2011. I think I went in 2010, and this fabulous work, which is there again. I think she did four or five of them. The blinding light that was spread on her bed, and this actually blinded me into silence, into I. And when she started speaking about this whole work, that actually, the whole room was resonating with spiritual energy. Everything for me became silent. At that time, I was arguing with her, why are you using so much of gold? You'll be criticized as, when you're doing black and white, and, using, because that whole show had a lot of gold in it. And I remember her telling me about Noor. She said that I am now of an age when I've started looking into my Noor, into my soul, the dark side and the bright side of my soul. Every human being has a soul, which is very, very bright. And she was showing me that beautiful work, Noor, which the bulbs were made in Pakistan, and how she gilded them in, in New York. And I'm so proud to say that that Noor is sitting with me, and I see her Noor every day in my house, in my collection. Another very vivid memory of mine, of hers, is that I was standing in a kitchen while she was taking out a few works. She said, I'll show you some works which are, I did in the late 70s and in the 80s. Ram is very aware of those works. And she started taking out her cast paper works. And I looked at them and I said, wow, Zarina ji, I think we should have a show. She said, do you think they're good to show? This was a humility and a simplicity. And I said, of course. And that is right. Sorry, I'm interrupting. This was one of the first show I had in the Delhi, where you see Arpita, Geeti Sen, Jatin Das in the background, and Zarina. So that's how the cast paper show, which was called the Paper House, happened. And both Zarina and I didn't know that it would be a turning point, that show, in her career, to make her so popular, even with all the museums. Allegra Pasenti, who was working as a curator in Hammer Museum, she was in Delhi, and my friend Javed Abdullah said to her, go and see this show. It's a show which is not worth missing. She came to my gallery and she fell in love with her work. She didn't know who Zarina was, all about her work. And she went back and researched, and she proposed to the museum, and they did her show, I think, in 2013. And that was her journey, which went, and I think in 2014, it went to Chicago, and then to Guggenheim. And her journey was like, and I remember Holland Cotter writing and saying, welcome home, Zarina, in New York Times. So that's how, you never know. And I would say that this is what globalization is. I also would like to, this outpouring of tribute past week from so many admirers from all across the world, fellow artists, gallerists, writers, and journalists, art historians, directors of museums, all giving us such rich tributes. This shows that how many lives and souls she touched with a minimalist art, the universality of a theme, home migration and identity. She, in many ways, I think, was just not beyond the stars, but also beyond the narrow boundaries of nationhood, territories, religion. And as Kalidas very rightly said, and he pointed out in his tribute article, the Indian artist who achieved the most international acclaim. We knew this, but it's touching for us as friends to read such accounts. Um, I also would like to share with you, Zarina, as a person with, or as an artist with all her gallerists. She was very, very firm with her galleries. My relationship with her was sometimes as a gallerist and as an artist and we bonded very, very well. But like all relationships, we had our ups and downs in our relationship. But she was very honest, fair, loyal to all her three gallerists. She had three galleries, and she still has three galleries in the world who work with her and her commitment. And I think this is a very good lesson for the younger artists to learn from her. Her commitment to her galleries was absolute. While she was very, very firm with her term, with her prices, and she was very particular about display and presentation, she was also concerned about her galleries doing with her work, uh, gaining commercially. Like she was always concerned about me as, whether I am gaining or not. But at the same time, nobody in the world could convince her to reduce her prices or to increase her prices. It was all her. She was so sure about her, framing her. She was very, very particular about. And what was wonderful, which I learned from her, and I give this and I tell this to so many artists, of my artists at least. She would always tell me, Renu, I never let any work from my studio, bad work of my get out from my studio, which I think is not up to the mark, even if it is for a group show or even if it is for a charity show. So you see, and the largest of hers, of like I don't remember the title of the work, but Ram had shown that work in one of his Sehmat shows in Chicago. She was so generous, she was so considerate that Bahadur in my gallery, he had helped her in doing that work in the gallery when she was with me for one of the shows. And that work, she acknowledged Bahadur, and I was telling her, she said to me, but he helped me, so I have to acknowledge him. So when she was not well, or when they heard her news, every person in my team really cried for her. She would not forget anybody in the gallery. And the most beautiful quality of hers was that her support to me. I'll never ever forget her extraordinary support and her consideration. It was in 213 at the Armory Fair where I was shown, and I couldn't go because I had met with a very, very bad accident. And she was standing before the opening day, making sure that the booth is set up. I had three artists, Chitra Ganesh and Reena Banerjee and Roobina. And she was there, and she was assuring me from there that don't worry, I'm looking after it. Which artist would really do for her galleries like that? So that was my relationship with her, of her her bonding, her concern, and even like to share with me for every title I would ask her, like for Folding House, I said, why are you putting this title? And she said to me, it is time for me to fold my life, my house. And that's what I'm looking at. In that particular work, there was one Chinese collector, Folding House, which Kiran Museum has in their collection. There was 50 more. I mean, she was so particular. There was this Chinese collector who wanted to buy the rest of it, and she refused. She said, I will not sell to any Chinese museum for humanity, for humanitarian reasons. That was her, her whole commitment. She was so sure of her work. I do remember asking her, and I would, in the early 2000s, I would tell her, every artist from India is going to the museum. They were meeting the directors and they're meeting so and so. Why don't you call them? Why don't you show them? She would always tell me, she says, why should I? Let my work speak on its own. Let them come when they want to come. The world will come. And actually, that's what happened. I was so happy when all her 20 pin drawings went to Guggenheim. She showed them to me, and I showed them in one small design fair here. And I think I showed 6 of them, and there were 20 more left. And I wanted to have a show of those, but she said, Renu, leave them. I want to give them to some public institute. Now, coming back to the shows like even when the last show we had in the gallery was in 2018, that was Weaving Darkness and Silence. And in 2017, I had gone to see her to see all these works to select them. And I said to her, I said, why are you so? Why are you? Why is it so dark? This title of yours? And she said to me, because I'm in a dark mood, because of politics. And just before that, I had shown her a beautiful wall of her works at the India Art Fair, and she spoke so much about the plight of refugees, especially the Rohingyas. At the Armory show also, it was all about Rohingyas, refugees, camps, their feelings. Like she would say, like, they're sitting in the boat, and I wonder how they feel going in the darkness to an unknown destination. That was her whole oneness with people, her whole, this whole universal love that would come out, her angst, her pain. And this whole Islamophobia which was happening in the world really pained her so much. With this, I think I would now request my speakers. First, I would ask Ram, who's a photographer who was with her in the 70s when he moved, and Zarina also had moved to New York. He shared her artistic practice and her journey and their work together. Ram, could you share with us your memories of that time and her art practice that time in New York?
Sure. Thank you, Renu. And I'm very pleased that we're doing this in Zarina's memory. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. I thought what I would do is actually put Zarina's work in a bit of context of the time, particularly in New York in the mid-70s, when she had just moved there, and I was a student at Yale in New Haven. And I used to go down to visit Zarina. And let me see, I'm trying to set up my slideshow. She had just got her little loft, which was actually in an industrial building, which was in the fur district on 29th Street. And it was illegal. We all used to live in illegal spaces. Yeah. There were a number of artists who had moved into that building. And
nice.
At that time in the mid-70s, artists in Soho, in Tribeca, and later down on South Street, where I found a loft, were all living in these illegal spaces, which got legalized slowly. But I thought, it's important to understand a little bit of background of Zarina, who was born in 1937. Her father was a professor of history at Aligarh Muslim University, Sheikh Abdur Rashid. So she was actually Zarina Rashid. And she came out of this very unusual atmosphere of Aligarh Muslim University, which produced a remarkable number of women who were extremely self-expressive, became writers, became scientists. Her father was a teacher of the great historian Irfan Habib, who's known for his work on Mughal India. And she studied mathematics, which was also, very unusual particularly for a woman at that time. She married Saad Hashmi, who had just entered the Indian Foreign Service in 1958. And it's, her sister and family had moved to Karachi during partition, but she and her father had come back to Aligarh at that time. And of course, Kali, etc., talk a bit about that trauma of partition and how it formed, her whole life experience. When her father retired, he moved to live with her sister in Karachi. So in a sense, Zarina kind of lost that root of hers in Aligarh. Over a long travel going through Paris, Tokyo, Brussels, she lands up in New York, uh, where Saad was in the UN, posted in the United Nations. But she and he were already, separating because she couldn't really deal with the diplomatic life. She was an independent woman, had started printmaking on her own in Japan, in Paris, under Stanley William Hayter at Atelier 17. So when I met her, I really got to know her. My parents had known her in the 70s. I had seen her show at Gallery Chanakya, etc. in 1970. But when I really got to know her in about 1975, 76. And we used to go in, I used to come down from New Haven and we would go and see all the new movies like Fassbinder or Fellini or Parajanov, Tarkovsky. She was a great movie buff and also somebody who read extensively in English, in Urdu, and in French. And oddly, the apartment that she lived in with Saad in Paris, after they moved out, that apartment was where Bernardo Bertolucci filmed his sensational film, Last Tango in Paris. Okay, this is 1977. Sorry, I didn't know you could see it. This is, as I told you, we were all looking for these spaces and studios, and this is one of the last areas in New York on South Street, where I found this raw loft. And you see me in the front, and just behind me is Zarina, and the woman with very puffy, big hair behind is Judy Reddy. On the left is Krishna Reddy, printmaker, and behind Zarina is my mother, Indrani, the dancer. And this is just showing you the kind of, the kind of material situation that we were in. It was a loft which hadn't been built. We built it with our hands, as did Zarina in her own space. These are from a catalog that Renu Modi had published. These are very early pictures, which I took in 1981 in Zarina's studio when she had started making this cast paperwork. And walking on her street, those were the days in New York when we would pick up material from the street to build our lofts with. I found this big plywood kind of sink. I mean, it was like a box, and carried it up to her loft. And she made it into a sink by adding a drain and waterproofing it. And that's what she used to make these cast paper pieces in. Now, how she did this is we would go shopping in Canal Street. At that time, Canal Street had these amazing shops of plastic, of rubber, and all those little indents that you see in the cast paper were these little pieces of plastic that she realized she could use and build a mold to do this architectural work. And her work, people say her work was abstract, but actually her work was never abstract. It was minimal, but it always had a reference to text, to poem, to architecture. And because of her mathematics, she was very fascinated by structure, by rhythm, by proportions in mathematics, proportions in architectural space. And her map work also came out of this very unusual thing which she had done when she was in Delhi in the 70s, was she joined the gliding club. And she used to fly gliders over the city of Delhi. If those people, any of you who are of that age, remember those gliders going over town. New York, there was a wonderful set of artists, Krishna Reddy, this is Melli Gobhai and Zarina, and that's my mother. I'd introduced Melli to this group of artists in New York. There was terrific camaraderie. At the same time, Zarina had joined a group of feminist artists in Soho. There were a couple galleries. She edited Heresies magazine. She had learned how to design and do paste up. which actually helped us later on when we had no money. I would get her paste up jobs in design studios working for $6, $7 an hour. This was the kind of struggle that we all went through at the time. But she was always very, very focused on her work. At Heresies, she was involved with, uh, let me see, with the AIR gallery, with Soho 20. I used to do exhibition design, poster design, and invitation cards for them. She curated a show with Ana Mendieta and Kazuko in 1980 at AIR Gallery, which was, part of the whole feminist movement happening in Soho at the time. There was a group, there were, white American women, Asian women, African women who were kind of outside the mainstream New York art world, and also men, of course. And a lot of them used to gather around Krishna Reddy's loft. Bob Blackburn, the great printmaker, at whose workshop Zarina had also worked and taught. And these two pictures I'm showing you are for a catalog that I'd done for Bodhi Gallery in 2005. On the left is a wonderful portrait done by the great photographer Shunil Jana, which was done in the 70s in Delhi. And she wanted a current portrait of hers in a way to reflect Jana's portrait. And I had just shown Jana's work in New York, and we had met him after many years. So the portrait you see on the right, which has been used a lot in the last 2 weeks as in her obituaries, was made in reference to the Jana work. And I'll show you the last image, which was done in 2005 in Krishna Reddy's loft with Tayyab and Sakina Mehta. Tayyab had come for his great mega painting sale at Christie's, which was something, quite unusual for him, because here was a simple artist who had sold work for not a lot of money, and he comes to Christie's and gets painted for this painting that he sells for a huge amount of money, million something. And at that same show, Zarina's first work came out in Christie's for $10,000 or $12,000. But it kind of made a benchmark for her. And I told her that she needed to do it because she needed to make money. So this was a kind of, I think I'll end here. And as we talk, I can fill in a little more about the times. But watching the journey from those days of $6 an hour to where she ended up in MoMA and in the Guggenheim and Art Institute of Chicago, was actually wonderful to see how an artist coming out of New York, which was such a competitive city, so many artists just don't make it. They spend their whole lives there. But Zarina really got recognized for the power of her art, which was so precise and so minimal and so beautiful. Hand over to you, Kali.
Thank you, Ram. As Ram just said, and Renu did too, Zarina and I went back to my childhood youth and to the late 60s, early 70s. And she had just come back from, I think, Bonn, if I remember correctly. And she was meeting people in Delhi, and her husband Saad bought a painting of my father's. And that was also the time when Zarina showed in a gallery called Gallery Chanakya, run by Shami and Mini Mendieta. It was a new gallery. It had just opened maybe a year ago. And I think the first show that Zarina had with them would have been late 60s, 68, 69, and then in the 70s. I think I had this picture, I think, is from 1970, from an opening of hers. And then the next picture, please. From the same show, we have another picture Can we have the Laila Tayyabi picture, please? Anyway, so there's another picture from the same exhibition where you see her with Laila Tayyabji, who remained a constant friend. Zarina, even at that time, and this was before she went to Japan, even at that time was quite minimal. I mean, she did prints of rubbings of wood mostly, and other natural material as today we use the word found object and the use of it in contemporary art, but Zarina was also finding objects and making rubbings of them in her wood prints, in her etchings, and she was always quite ahead of her time. Even then, her work was minimal. And then she went away to New York, but she would return every second or third year, and she would always return with works. I mean, she never stopped showing in India. So you can see her work there. I mean, it's bits of plywood assembled together and then rubbed on paper. And how beautifully young they all look. Every 2 or 3 years, she would return from New York or wherever she was with a show. And with every show, she made impact. Her stock amongst her peers, amongst artists senior to her, and artists her age, even young boys like me, was huge. I mean, she was a very friendly person. She was a very articulate person, and her work was absolutely fantastic. Now we come to her. Come to a work which, as Renu alluded to, in the last 10 years, it was the idea of a refugee, a person who has lost his home, that concerned her the most. And as Rahman mentioned, she had grown up in Aligarh in a conservative Muslim family, and her great love was Urdu poetry, and that is how we came close, because she realized that in the intervening decades, I had learned Urdu from my school friend Safdar Hashmi, and I could read the script, and I was also deeply interested in Urdu poetry. So that was a bond between us, and she would send me stuff on email when email came to be, and from various poets. The poets that remained close to her were the classical poets like Mir Taqi Mir and Ghalib. This particular image is a work of hers called Delhi. As Ram mentioned, she looked at Delhi from the bird's eye view, from the skies, as it were. And on the skeletal roadmap of Delhi, she suspends 6 lines from Mir Taqi Mir, and the lines read, क्या बूदो बाश पूछो हो पूरब के साकिनों, हमको गरीब जान के हंस हंस पुकार के, दिल्ली जो एक शहर था आलम में इंतखाब, रहते थे बल उन तक ही जहां रोजगार के, उसको फलक ने लूट के वीरान कर दिया, हम रहने वाले हैं उसी उजड़े दयार के. In translation, it would mean we must remember that Mir lived in the mid 18th century, and in 1739, when Nadir Shah invaded India from Iran, Delhi was disrupted. Delhi was disrupted twice. It was disrupted in 1739 and then in 1856, and then in 1947, thrice in fact. And Zarina addressed her work to a Delhi destroyed. So these lines of Mir are from a period when Mir had to leave Delhi Delhi and seek refuge in Lucknow. And he tells his friends in the East that why ask where I come from, O dwellers of the East, knowing of my homelessness, you laugh and you taunt. Delhi, that was once a select city in the world, where only the chosen of every trade lived, then heaven looted it and left it desolate. I am a citizen of that very place. Now, this could be applied to Delhi too, because Delhi, when Zarina returns to Delhi from a post 9/11 New York, she feels that she's returning to a place which has been desolated. At least the world that she knew, the Delhi that she knew, the language that she spoke in was no longer spoken in Delhi. The life that she led was no longer, it was a life led in past. And this idea of melancholy that a lot of Urdu poets wallow in lingered in Zarina's, art till the end, especially her last few years. She kept returning to the idea of a home that she had lost, of a city that she had lost. And she once quoted a line from Ghalib to me, and she said that, let's go and live in a place where we know nobody. And if we fall ill, there should be nobody to look after us. And if I were to die, there should be nobody to sing elegies for me. So that pathos of having lost a world of her childhood, became more and more, it crystallized as she grew older. What the other thing, which again Renu alluded to, was that as she entered her last phase, was this idea of a divine light, of Noor, as they say in Sufism. And it is to express that divine light and Noor that she started using gold. And she used it lavishly, made screens of gold, made objects of gold, used gold in her paperwork, and especially about the work which is called Blinding Light, which is a large screen with slits in it of pure gold. And she said that initially I thought using this much gold in an exhibition might make it garish, but when I think of the story of Moses and the blinding light, I had to use gold in this case. And the story that she related to me was that the legend is that Moses asks God to reveal himself. God had warned Moses that that he would not be able to stand the light of his presence, but Moses insisted. And when God revealed himself, Moses fainted, and the surrounding hills and bushes burned. And in a way, Zarina has withdrawn into a burning purity, as it were, And I think that would be enough for me to say. Roobina, would you take it on from there?
Thank you, Renu and Ram and Kali. I think you've covered a lot of ground. I knew of Zarina in the 1990s and occasionally got to see her works. One of this, which Renu mentioned, an exhibition of prints at Gallery Espace, which was my first exposure to her work, and in due course saw many other exhibitions, and I was fascinated by her work. But I came to know her personally when I was on my Fulbright fellowship at Mills College in California, where she was putting up an exhibition of her 10 years, 1990 to 2001, called Mapping a Life, which was curated by the provost and the Asian art scholar Mary Ann Milford Lutzker. And Marian and Zarina were friends, and they came home, and that's how my conversations with Zarina began. And we really had interesting conversations which revolved around the notion of solitude, the notion of belonging, unbelonging, loss, language, etc. And my interest in Urdu and Urdu culture and her interest really brought us together. And what was very interesting about that show, this is a picture taken right there in October 2001, when I was assisting her to install these huge installations with the houses and bird-like houses. Can I go to the next one? Yeah, it was called Mapping a Life, and it was in California. Next, can I go to the next quickly? We landed up talking about language, and it was very interesting. The image that I want to show you after this is from that exhibition, and there were huge crowds that came to see this exhibition, quite intrigued by Zarina's work, trying to position her work, slot in somewhere, where would she fit in, but very intrigued by the Urdu titles in her work. And one of the works shows a bamboo blind or a dried grass cheek, which you put up in hot summer so that the breeze comes in cool, okay? And Zarina and I were standing in the exhibition, and somebody was talking about work in a completely different way. And she was making a comment on how things get lost in translation. Okay, how do things get lost in cultural translation? How can this person who's standing here, उसको कैसे समझ में आएगी दोपहर की धूप, और उस धूप के बाद धूप में जो हम ब्लाइंड लगाते हैं या जो चीक लगाते थे और जिसके पीछे से ठंडी हवा आती थी, जब उस घास को गीली करते थे अम्मी, तो कितनी ठंडी हवा आती थी. Now this experience or this fragrance of that dried grass being watered and something like that on a long summer afternoon, which is the title of this work. And from there we had several conversations in translation, which is a very deeply etched memory in my mind, because I started looking at her work very differently from there on, not thinking so much about the annals of minimalism or any other formalism or of that kind, or what Ram rightly said, abstract. But yes, in the realm of abstraction, how really her work fitted in. I was also fascinated by the titles of her work. And when I came, in fact, I must remember this and quote it here because Ram brought this up. I remember meeting Ram in 2002 at Zarina's loft, which was a gravitating place. It was an Eid party, and she had invited me because after that we were emailing each other. We were in some conversation, and she invited me and my husband, and we went there. And there was a full house in that loft with Krishna Reddy, Ram Rahman, Meera Nair, Amitav Ghosh. And yes, she particularly took me to meet an African-American artist called Howardina Pindell, who was also there that day in that group of people. And quite a person, you know, she also was somebody who worked with abstraction and a very strong activist and feminist of a person. And in that whole group, it was interesting to see how Zarina was making everybody comfortable, and people were just moving around from a studio space into this little loft space and enjoying themselves. I continued this conversation with her, and for a very long time wanted to do an exhibition on her. Renu knows about it, how long we have been talking about an exhibition at KNMA of Zarina's work. I did not know that this would be the last exhibition of hers, which is now ongoing, and it is called Zarina Life in 9 Lines. Three things that really drove me to structure the curatorial part of this exhibition. One was the titles of her works. Second is the language Urdu, because she talks about how the text really prompts the image. And third was how she moves from making sculptural forms to gradually abstracting her own materiality, and gradually the work becomes more and more minimal and more stark and pure, which is the way this exhibition unfolds at KNMA. For the titles parts, for the title part, I would like to say, I used to make a note of all her exhibition titles. And I found it very interesting how she started from home is a foreign place. It is all about home, Aligarh, the house, Baba's house in Aligarh, which is the memory that she carries throughout in her life and keeps going back to referencing that in different ways and different forms. And this repetition, this rhyming, this really obsession with that, seeing it in fragments, seeing it in a whole, seeing it fully, drawing it, designing it, planning it, talking about where what was, moving through these spaces, architecturally, topographically, in geometry, in poetry. Very interestingly, how she really house, and there are poems by her where she says that all of us, wherever we are, dead or alive, all of us at night meet in the house at Aligarh, which is very strongly talking about the bonds and also the law at the same time. Belonging and unbelonging was always a conflict that went on in hers. In the titles, it is very interesting when she says that she made her life the subject of art. I think that can be traced through her exhibitions as they happened. That can be also traced through her titles of her exhibitions. So if she starts with home is a foreign place, and then she goes on to say house on wheels, then it comes to atlas of my world, and then it comes to world as home. It literally talks about how she has moved in life, how she has really, how she has pondered on the notion of home. Is home a permanent location? Is home a permanent place? What is home? Is it permanent, impermanent? Aakhri maqam kya hota hai? In Islam, there is a very strong uh, uh, teaching that happens right in the beginning of your life when you're born, that you are here and this is not your permanent place. Whether you call it home or not, there is some home that eventually you will go. और ये मकान और मकाम के बीच में जो बात चलती है, this is what goes on in Zarina's work through and through, and that is very interesting to look at. So when you read her titles, you really find the way she opens up, and really she embraced the world as home, because she lived in different countries, across continents, across cities, and she has talked about them. She has, in fact, recorded every little place that she lived, okay? And the idea of house on wheels becomes very potent then. So this motif of home is explored by her in so many different ways. In the exhibition, when you enter through arches, which are actually taken from a picture of her house with arches that I had found. And I have put these arches, and from the arches, you enter a big screen in the exhibition space, which is full of Urdu words without English titles. They're all Urdu words. And if somebody reads Urdu, they will understand this can be the summary of her life. Because all the kinds of complex emotions, feelings, that she went through, whether the feeling of dehshat, whether the feeling of being alone, loneliness, solitude, ghar, maqam, chaukhart, ufaq, it just goes on, and the way the world and the home interact in that space is very interesting for me. On the one hand, there are fragments and details of home. On the other hand, it is about horizons, stars, seas, us par, is par, jo hai, beyond stars, jo life hai. It goes on. The thing that I really got very keen to study and to look into more deeply was her language of form. For instance, it is just like the simplest or the barest form of geometry, basic shapes, building blocks or bare bones, you know, how she plays with just lines, creates shapes, and the shapes are so elemental, so rudimentary. And it's very interesting, such an elemental, such a simple language, but so loaded. It is so loaded completely. Can you just go to the first one? So this is how you enter the exhibition. And my idea was to really look at her sculptural forms, because I was very interested in materiality as she talks about it. She always liked to work with fragile materials and really find resilience in them, you know, whether it was paper or it was paper pulp. It was interesting that she talked about the fragility of the material important to her, the rawness of the material that was very important to her. And I think that molding of paper pulp and the cast paper was an interesting exercise that she began, which you see in this room where you have early drawings and a lot of sculptural forms. I was interested because most times there have been fantastic exhibitions of Zarina, but somehow the emphasis on the sculptural forms and the sculptural making of forms with other things perhaps needed to be shown is what I felt. And I really enjoyed, thanks Renu for locating many of these works so that they could be shown in this exhibition. Next, please. This is, of course, the very famous work, Poems I Made, A Life in 9 Lines, from which is also the title of the work. And this is what I talk, how these elaborate plans come about. And in many of these plans of homes that she lived in, she has actually written, you know, what is where. And that remembrance and experience of living and making those homes is also a very interesting exercise that keeps happening from time to time. But at this time, her memory is clear. She's able to draw these plans out. She's able to spell out Baba's ghar fully in terms of also where was what, where was the garden, where were the flowers, where was the water, where was Amma's room, where was Abba's room, and many of those kinds of details. Next. But then a phase comes gradually where the houses start to become more and more, less and less of material, and more abstraction comes in. And she almost, you can't see these two works, but these two works are like a pattern, like a chatai in which you have to actually find the house, because the house is just lost in that pattern that she has made. It's like weaving a pattern, and then somewhere there is a little house that you can identify. But on both sides, what you see, and I really like the fragility of her later works, where she cuts out and just completely evacuates all material, and it really becomes like a shimmering, a very fragile memory of the house, almost like it's there but not there. You know, literally it's become invisible. It's just a memory of a house that next that gradually translates into something so fragile. These are like really very delicate cutouts of paper, of graphite on paper. And subsequently, I found out that many works of this period in 2000 and onwards, she really turns the house, or the house is turning into a puzzle. She's writing about how she is now entering the house, but cannot exit it, you know. And it's almost like in visual terms, the house which was then planned, designed, had structural purity, had structural form, had clarity in terms of how she takes us through, makes us navigate this house, makes us go through its haunted parts, gradually becomes a puzzle. And it's the fading memory, the forgetfulness, the loss of clarity, the house that has been razed down, it's not there anymore, all that coming together, and the house then becomes something of this kind. And she calls it the frailest form of house. You know, it has become so frail. That's what has happened to her memory. That membrane is becoming so frail, it's fading. And it really takes on, in fact, there are some more works which I have not put in here, but they are in the exhibition, where she's literally making the house, breaking it and making it into a puzzle form. So you really, the house turns into a puzzle. And it's like any one of us, you know, if we try to remember our grandfather's place, or if I try to remember my ancestral graveyard and many such places, there are just those little memories or those little bits that come to your mind, and you're trying to put things together and piece them together. And that's what you see in Zarina in the later works. And besides this, I think I'll quickly just want to share that memories, she talks a lot about memories, but these memories are very complex. In fact, I don't think that we can simply slot it as the loss of a home. I think they become much more complex with her travels. They really move spheres. In fact, I think her works, they become extremely political at one level, but they are also philosophical. They take on spiritual movings. They become very spiritual at some points. And when you read her own writings, you realize that that became a way for her to think about so many things. You know, it is, when I look at something like this, I feel that the preoccupation and the obsession with the house form could go to such extent that this is a work which is called Family Portrait. And you see an empty frame, and you see a thread on which it hangs. And what it says everything. I mean, it, first of all, the empty frame and the thread makes it a house form. Again, I mean, she could see a house anywhere and everywhere, literally. But the emptiness of the frame also talks about the sense of loss with time, you know. So the family that was there once, the house that was there once, is not there anymore. And she, in fact, if you read the letters of Rani, which are also part of the exhibition, which is on at KNMA, Rani is writing to her about every death that happens in the family, how the father is gone, the mother is gone, and then asking a question, who will go next? Who knows? You know, and so that continues, you know, that kind of conversation about death, you know, continues. And I think that is also the reason why the phase of darkness came so strongly in her work, where she started thinking much more about death. Okay. And I think that is the time when you see, when the darkness becomes more intense, that is where the noor, or the light, really becomes visible. You know, and that's how I would see it. I'm not going to touch on all the works that are in the show, but some of the interesting things, like these little houses on wheels, you know, that you see that she makes in a row, you know, or many of these kinds of sculptural forms, you know, where she saw a scissor but saw a house in a scissor. These kind of associations that she used to bring in and talk about, I remember in my personal conversations with her. I think we can add on as we go along.
Lovely, Roobina. That was very moving.
Thank you, Ram.
Roobina, what you spoke about the darkness, you know, and you said about the soul, she once mentioned to me, we were talking about her work, about the material. Kali, you remember that black obsidian, the dark night of the soul, the diptych? What you said now, she said to me that I look at both the bright and the dark side of a soul. She said, I'm using this obsidian because it gives that depth, it gives that, you know, that darkness that which is there. And that's how she used obsidian. I mean, every material also what she used,
yes,
wasn't as if she just used it like that. Everything was carefully thought about and then selected. And the Sumi ink which she used, and the tasbih she made out of the Sumi ink was like, you know, you just merge into them when you look at it as a viewer.
yes.
And this work I have, in which I can't show now, but you now said about houses, about Angan, you know, there's a work which is called The Echo. All around she has, I asked her, so she said, wo awazein goonjti hai wo Angan ki. So then I asked her the meaning, if there was some meaning around that square which she had done, or the strips of paper in Urdu. She said, you know, she would not waste a single little, I think even a half a centimeter of paper she never wasted. They were all put very neatly in a box, which Yukari, her assistant, would keep. And she would use them as and when she wanted to. So she said to me, "Itni gungti hai wo aawazein, tab maine ye aangan banaya ghar ka." So you know what you now said, in the night also she used to wake up. Like once she rang me up and said, "Main puri raat jagti rahi because ideas came, words came, images came. So I wanted to sit and draw. So before Yukari comes, so that she could paste all what I wanted to do." It was that kind of an passion, that kind of.
Well, one very important thing with Zarina was her love of books.
Yeah.
And that whole love of paper actually came from that love of books.
Yes.
And also the whole notion of printing on paper, when you're talking about this darkness and the obsidian, that whole idea of using that heavy black ink, which sank into the paper,
Yes.
was so important to her. It was a kind of material expression of an emotion in a very, very deep manner. And this whole link to the language is also linked to this whole fascination with, the book as an object, and then, creating different ways of looking at the book when she would make those cast paper pieces and bind them together like a big open book.
Those forms also look like calligraphy, scripts and texts, literally, they would look like puzzles, but they were also like calligraphic forms, which was very interesting. In fact, she talked about some very difficult feelings and emotions. And at times, she said that I read in one of her books that she used to write that fragrance is very important, And sometimes, when I go back in time and to my house in Aligarh, I used to remember people because of the fragrance they wore. Now, how do you really translate this into a work, for instance, So there were these indescribable emotions, indescribable things also, which really she tried to make or give it a language or give it some kind of an image in some way. And I think that's where the text became very important.
I mean, she always said that she thought of the word came first and then the image.
And then that processed it. Yes, and that's why this exhibition, I have emphasized this whole idea of the word. I don't think I have seen many works where I see poetry and geometry coming together so beautifully. Poetry and geometry really interweave in her work. One without the other is not read completely.
In fact, this frailest house which you are showing now, this was the first work she did of this kind, of a drawing plus this cut work. She was on the West Coast for some residency. She had gone for a month or two. And that's when she did, I think, 3 or 4 of them. So when I did the show, she said she got this with her, on her, when she came to India for the show. And that's how she said, "I really want to put it so special to me." So that's how this work. And there were 2 or 3 more. I don't know what happened. She must have given to other galleries. I forgot to ask her.
But you see, the wonderful thing about Zarina's work, for those of us who can understand the language and understand, the connection with the image. But when you saw the work in Paris or in New York or in Chicago, now people who had no connection to the language, the work, just in its visual purity, actually moved people.
Yes.
They could understand to some extent the depth of what she was talking about, even without, connecting to the elusive and ephemeral use of the words, etc. And I think that's something, and I think that's why she got recognized so widely, because that work actually spoke. When you're talking about lost in translation,
yes,
actually in many ways it didn't get lost.
It got reinvented.
Languages.
But she was conscious of the fact that in the feminist movement, what she saw of the Black American artists, for instance, or other artists, it was important to hold your ground. And for her, it was important to talk about identity in a very different way, you know. And I think she somewhere in one of my conversations did talk about that. And yes, she was very, she also had English texts. She also wrote in English. It's not that she only presented her work in, you know, using Urdu couplets or Urdu texts. She did make it a point to really have also her works with English texts or English titles. But I think the cultural specificity at that particular point of time, you know, she did carry with her this idea, you know. And I think I remember as a student when I was growing up, I was very fascinated by Chagall's story that when he was young, he left the village in Russia and then he grew up in Paris as an artist. And he lived a very long life, 90 plus, God knows. And whenever he was called back to his hometown, his own village, he refused to go because he felt that the memories that he carried with him of that place, they would get completely disrupted and they would get completely destroyed if he was to see his native village after 70 years.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, Zarina did go back, and on her last trip, yeah, she took me along with her, in fact, and it was very moving to see her in Aligarh and to visit Saad Hashmi's grave, and we had lunch with Irfan Habib. But she was very disturbed after the trip.
Yes. Subsequently, the subsequent trips left her very, very angry at times and very pained at times. And she has expressed them. Renu knows about them. You would know about them. How
the house had been destroyed and rebuilt, and it was very painful for her.
When she came
was
back,
very disturbed about what the direction that India was taking, you know, especially after the Babri Masjid demolition. And then, and of course, 9/11 in New York.
Yeah.
The whole communal in India, the rise of communalism was deeply disturbing to her.
very disturbing.
And yeah, it kind of, you know, that whole Nehruvian period that she grew up in, and those lovely lives of all these artists who lived in those barsatis in Nizamuddin and in Ankura, etc. In many ways, I actually saw her studio in New York as a Delhi barsati on 29th Street.
So well said.
She carried that Ravi Sikri mini boga furniture with her. She carried that Riten Mazumdar cushion covers and bed covers. And it really was a barsati in New York.
But it's interesting that she writes about each city, her expression of or experience. And for New York, she writes a space to hide forever.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think with this we have to, I think it's more than an hour. I think people would be, I mean, we can keep on talking. Thank you so much, Ram, Kali, Roobina, all talking about Zarina. What better memory way to celebrate her life and her work. Thank you so much.
And please keep the exhibition on, Roobina, so we can all see it when we are allowed to move.
I would like to do that, and I think Kiran would also like to do that, and hopefully there are a lot of people wanting to see the exhibition. I myself want to spend some time with it. I think we will extend it definitely once this lockdown.
And
but thank you all.
A few
Thank you very much.
A few questions. Is one, would you like to answer that? If you're aware of this particular one, which Tarana Sahani has sent, which she's talking about those 1,000 things, you know, which she had shown, I think first at the Lorena, she showed, or at Veronica, I don't remember, because she used to talk to me about it, that I'm doing it. Tarana Sahani, I don't know where the question is gone. Tarana says a work called 10,000 Things, 2016, was shown a few years ago at the Dhaka Art Summit. You know, it traveled. Can you please speak a little about that? Because it seemed almost like it was an archive of a practice. It was actually. That's what she said to me. Any of you aware of that work? Because she said, "मैं रोज कर रही हूँ कुछ ना कुछ."
Those were those small pieces.
2,000 बन गए, हाँ.
Yeah, which she showed in that circular construction, which was also shown in the Guggenheim. Well, in many ways, I think that's a kind of notation. You know, it's like a diary, which
Yes.
is done visually, you know, on a daily basis. And it's all, you know, all her work is, of course, very emotional. And as I said, you know, none of it is actually really abstract because everything is rooted in reality, in some reality. And I think that whole unit, it was kind of an unusual construction for her to do in that elaborate circular manner that you had to walk around.
Yes.
It was almost like orbiting, you know, orbiting the sun or orbiting a planet that you could see emotional life as you went in this cosmic circle around those objects.
Can I share a few of the comments? Everybody is thanking. There are lots of people. Wonderful talk. Thank you all panelists. There is one from Uni Karunakara to all panelists. Enduring memories of Zarina. Too many to recollect. Perhaps the most memorable was accompanying Zarina to the finissage of a paper-like skin show at the Guggenheim. When realized Zarina was the artist, she was mobbed by people from very many nationalities, people who had the same sense of dislocation, displacement, and disconnect with from home. It was an extremely emotional moment, and many tears were shed. I was fortunate enough to spend an afternoon with Zarina in London 10 months ago. It was a good day. The sun was shining and her face was lit up with news. Bon voyage, Zarina. In fact, I met her last year in June, and I'm so happy. I just went for her for 2 days to spend time with her. And she was so happy to see me, and you know, those memories will last in my heart. And Shami Mehndi Ratta writes, I think, glad to share with you. I attended the exhibition at the Mills College, Oakland, and attended the opening of her exhibition in San Francisco as well. She was a darling, and her work minimal in black and white and stunning. She lived a full life with all limitation. Hats off, my Zarina. Love you and bless you. I was at Christie's in New York, where Tayyab Mehta's painting crossed $1 million. What an evening with Tayyab, Sakina, Zarina, and my sweetheart, Maribel. Who was Maribel? When somebody writes to Roobina, for the show, Roobina, just hold on. I think for all panelists, Shami again writes, Zarina bought a painting worth rupees 2,000 from the show of J. Swaminathan from my gallery, Chanakya, in 1971.
I remember that. You used to sit on her shelf.
Somebody was congratulating you, Roobina, for your exhibition at KNMA of Zarina's. So,
actually, I told you, Roobina, that Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh got so moved by that exhibition that he called me from the show because he got so moved he needed to speak to somebody. And he said I was the only person he could think of, you know, to just connect emotionally. And I still haven't seen the show, but I'm, you know, waiting for this lockdown to end so we can rush over there.
there is one Cordula von Keller. I think she's got some work from us. Thank you very much for this very insightful conversation. It was wonderful listening to your memories and stressing the spiritual travel she fulfilled so beautiful in her work. So I think with this, we need to, Seher Shah writes, thank you, Renu, for the wonderful photograph from New York. Artists in my generation have so much to learn from this spirit of kinship and kindness that she had with everybody. She loved talking to younger artists and younger people. She enjoyed them. We need to end this. And thank you all. Thank you all the people, everyone, all friends who've joined to listen to our conversation. More so from Roobina when you open your exhibition at the museum.
Yes, we look forward.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Well, and I hope this is recorded and we can see it later on.
Recorded and everyone can see it. Tell all your friends. Bye. Yeah. Bye, Roobina. Thank you. Bye, Kali.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, all.
And bye the whole team who's helped us put up this whole fabulous
and goodbye, Zarina.
Thank you, Pargi.
Goodbye, Zarina. And I hope Saima and Imran are listening to it.
Wow.
I